Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations, and stories of education, leadership, and life. In this episode, I'm joined by Paul Jones, who used to be my boss. Paul is a former executive head and CEO of a multi-academy trust that I used to work for as a head teacher, and I still do some work with him now. He has an OBE for his services to education, and we talk lots about his journey across his career in education. We look at his experience of teaching the traveller community, what it was like starting the first Federation of Schools in the UK. We reminisce about leadership and some of our work together and how things have changed over time. I really enjoyed recording this episode, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Let's get going. Hi, Paul. It's so great that you have been willing to give up a bit of your time. Obviously, we know each other really well, but it would be really great if you could just share who you are and where you are joining from in the world.
Okay, my name is Paul Jones. I'm an education consultant and retired CEO, and I'm down in lovely Exmouth in Devon.
Beautiful, mostly sunny, not always Devon. Amazing. Right. I always like to be nosy and find out about people's own school experiences. So where were you at school, and what sort of school did you go to, and what was that like for you?
Okay, well, I was brought up in Bridgewater in Somerset, which I escaped at 18, never to go back. And I don't want to put Bridgewater down, but if anybody's been there, they'll know what I'm talking about. Interestingly, I went to my great aunt's school as a primary school. My great aunt started a school in Bridgewater in the 1920s. And she had and my mum moved from Wales, gone down to Bridgewater to open a girls' commercial school, a secondary commercial school that were fed on from the primary. So I went there, and then I passed the 11 plus and went to Dr. Morgan's Grammar School for Boys in Bridgewater, which probably shaped the whole person I am by the fact that actually I hated it.
Oh no!
I hated my schooling. None of it was enjoyable. There were one or two great teachers that always stick in your mind, and looking back on reflection, that's great, because you then know those people can make a difference. But my secondary school was hierarchical. It was driven by a Victorian attitude of how things should be run. Masters wearing gowns and flouting around the quadrangle, and it was riddled with bullying. And if you were somebody who put your head up above the parapet, you were systematically caned and thrown back into the class. So no. It was one of those things which it's not made any scarring on me on it at all. It just meant that when I got into education, it was going to be my mission to be completely the opposite of my experience.
And was that part of your drive to then go into it as a career?
No, to be honest, it's in my blood, my DNA. So my mother was a head teacher. My great aunt started her own school. My great aunts were all in education. One is actually named as one of the authors in the Plowden report, the big report from the 1970s. My dad's sister was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. My uncle was a lecturer in education. So there was no choice. I was going down that route.
That was the route.
But interesting, I got to come to Exmouth in 1972 to Roll College to train. And I was one of the few blokes that I talked to that actually was there to be because I wanted to become a teacher. They were there because they didn't know if they wanted to become a teacher. And I think a lot of people went to college like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I was absolutely certain that I wanted to be a teacher. So it's been a road that was started very early on.
In your blood.
Yeah.
And so what did your first, I guess, steps into your job roles, and what did that little bit into leadership look like? I remember that you once told me that you taught, I think you did a lesson at the school where I was head in the hall once. Was that when you were teaching? Do you remember? Because I remember you told me the story where you were in the hall and they were all taught in the hall. And I'm sure there was a head teacher in the office above.
Yeah.
And she banged the.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. With your new headship. I met my wife, Jude, at college, and she was 2 years below me. So when I left, I stayed in Exmouth area because she was still at college. So that's, it's a classic thing, isn't it? And so initially I went, I did supply, and I went to Lady Seawards, and it was run by a lady there who had been there for years and had run it as virtually a private school. And the downstairs hall was the classroom, and then there was a grandfather clock that chimed all the way through every lesson. I was the first male teacher in that school for 5 years. The boys had never played football. They used to answer questions by standing up, and they said "sir" at the beginning of the sentence and "sir" at the end of the sentence, like a military reply. And then about 10:30,
I love this bit.
there's this banging on the ceiling, and this lovely little girl got up, went across the classroom, didn't speak to me, went across the room, put the kettle on, and made a cup of tea, and then took it up the stairs to the head teacher's, because she lived upstairs, because she was off ill. That's why I was teaching, and she took her a cup of tea at 10:30. And they all through the day, there was this couple of bangs on the ceiling, and for different things to be taken to her.
I remember it, and I tell that story to people because I just think that education just used to be so different, didn't it? I mean, can you imagine? I'd quite like to reinstate it. I used to say to people, I might reinstate a little bell. Mrs. Lurie needs a cup of tea.
And we that was 75. So decimalisation had been in for a while by then. They were still doing pounds, shillings, and pence in their books. And right,
I mean, that's autonomy, isn't it? Right there. That lady was going to do it how she wanted to do it and not worry about anything else.
And every parent loved her and thought she was wonderful, and she ran this school. And it was, it was quaint. And it suited the building, because you know what the building was like. It looks like a little cloistered vicarage, doesn't it? It's very great.
Beautiful place.
Yeah. But my first real job, my first full-time job was I said I teach anywhere and anything. The only job I didn't go and do supply-wise was to teach A-level chemistry, right? And they knocked on my door and said, and I said, I'm a primary school teacher. I'm a scientist, but I don't think those students really are getting a good deal for me going in and learning the night before what they're going to teach them. So that's the only one. But they knocked the guy, the old teachers' wardens in those days, knocked on my door and said, we need somebody to go and work on a gypsy site. I said, okay. And I went to see the head teacher of the school that had the responsibility of the gypsy site. But the gypsy site was 15 minutes away from the school. I walked into his office. He had the gas fire blaring, and it was red hot in there. His 2 dogs were sat either side of by the heat, sunning against the heat, and he had a big broadsheet paper in front of him and a big jug of hot chocolate for himself. And that was my first introduction to a head teacher.
That's what you modelled yourself on.
Yeah. I do. From then on, that's it. That's the one for me.
Yeah, right. Bang the ceiling, get a cup of tea, get some dogs. Oh, so what was it like teaching in that sort of environment?
Well, it was brilliant. I was a young boy, really. They took me over to the site. The site was the itinerant site at Southton, which meant you never knew how many children you're going to have, and you didn't know how many families were going to be on the site. It could be 50 or none, and you could have 50 the night before and go home and come back next day, they're all gone, or you have none and they'd be rolling in and you'd have 50. And the social services at the time provided the caravan for me to teach out of, which cost them £45. Right? It had an internal gas cylinder in what looked like a wardrobe, right, and a gas fire on the inside. So health and safety was. And my brief was last. They literally said, "We've never had anybody last more than 4 weeks."
How long did you do?
3.5 years.
Well done.
And it was a great experience. We've got lots of perks. One of the perks was it opened at 10 and closed at so 10 till 12 and 1 till 3. And I used to go on the site, and I was told I had to ring a bell, and whoever turned up, I taught.
So different.
And it was both English and Irish travellers, but they didn't mix on the site. So if there was a small number of English gypsies on the site, then if the Irish travellers arrived and there were more of them, the English left, and vice versa. Okay. But I taught about 250 different children a year, and they come and go. I think I used to have babies in, right? Because the only way to get the 10, 9, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old girls were that they would be looking after the youngest children in the family, because both the parents were out hawking or working or tarmacking, whatever. And therefore they they couldn't come to school if I didn't have the 18-month-old in.
That's like community education. And I bet you had to just be so flexible with what you were doing. Yeah, really fascinating way of stepping into it. So how did you get into leadership then? Because I really want to talk about a big part of the leadership journey, which comes a bit later, but what were your first steps into leadership?
I always wanted to be a head teacher, so that was, it was never a thing that sort of came about. There was always a plan. And I did 3.5 years on the gypsy site, and then went into the main school at Brookleys and worked for 3 head teachers there in a short period of time. And any opportunity that came along to take on something new, I would do it. So I actually, when the first BBC computers came out, I basically was the person who said, "Oh, I'll get involved in that." And so you end up, I did all the games and sports, but I also was biology was my love, so therefore I did all science in school. But getting the computing under the belt, then all of a sudden you had scale 2s or A's and B's, and you just given more responsibility to take on subjects. So leadership was all about subjects in those days. And I think I took time doing it. Just an interesting side, I never got a degree. I got a certificate of education. Okay, so I was certified, which people said I should have been for a long time. But I went for a career interview with what was called an area education officer, who was the person who ran East Devon School. And he said, "Oh, you'll never get a headship role without a degree. You've got to go and do an in-service degree. You'll never get it." Well, you know me, that's a red rag to a bull. So I'm going to stop
I will
you.
show you.
I'm going to be a head teacher. You know, and if I do, then I might go and get a degree, but I'm going to prove you wrong. So, you know, I got deputy headships. I took the opportunity when I became deputy head of St Peter's in Budley, and it was at the time when the 89, I think the 89 Act came in, and the local management schools came in, and then that's when, you know, local authorities' money was going into school, was go straight to schools, and they could make more decisions. But it came with computer systems and finance. Well, the head was a brilliant man, lovely man to work for, great man. But he did not want anything to do with it. And a lovely lady in the office was a school secretary. She didn't know. So my computing bit came in. So I did all the courses that they gave for heads on local management of schools. So that meant when it came to being my first headship, I wasn't thrown in the deep end and thinking, what the hell do I now do? I'd actually done 5 years of doing it before that happened. And we were, so I basically, every time in my career, I decided I would work in a school that was different from the school I did previously been. So in terms of demographics, so, you know, a rural school, small school, large school, you know, in an areas of social deprivation, etc., back into a middle class, you know. So it was, and I also decided that I would do every age range I would teach in every age range. If I was going to be a head, I was going to be able, I would have said I have actually worked in every age range. So I did do 5 years in a first school, a 5 to 8 school. So that was interesting. And then all of a sudden I thought, right, now's the time. And I applied for school, Summerway Middle School in Exeter.
Yeah.
Unbeknown to me, it had been inspected, was one of the first schools to be inspected by the Devon inspection team. An officer had just come out, and it was absolutely awful. The head went and they applied, they threw me in. I mean, there's one old lag teacher there said to me on about my second day, well, you know why you got the job? It's because you're inexperienced, don't know anything, you're bound to fail, and they don't care.
Red rag to bull, you thought, I'll show you.
Yeah. And that was an interesting. I learned so much in the 4 years in that school about myself and about leadership.
Yeah.
Big time.
When you get thrown in, that tends to happen.
Yeah, the problem in reflection is the only way I knew how to do it, to improve the school, was to virtually carry it personally, everything, and do everything. And it's unsustainable. So I learned at the end of it, that's not what you do. But in fact, it was what was necessary when I did it. So I couldn't have done it any other way. But what I learned is you don't have to do that again. You can find a better way of doing it. But I learned so much about leadership, teams, groups, teachers, professional development. It was a very interesting school. HMI came in with a monitor, what would have been a monitoring visit at the end of my first term, and they gave me a year to turn it around, or they would have closed the school. Do you remember the riding school?
Yeah.
Well, they likened it to the riding school.
Okay.
So they said we'll get, and the HMI was scared me to death. Absolutely scared me to death. And I walked him out down the corridors at the end of the 2-day monitoring visit, and he said he told the governors, and me, blah, blah, blah. And he turned to me at the door to go to the car park, and he shook me by the hand. He said, "You know you can do it, don't you?"
Oh.
And and my mouth dropped open, and I didn't see that coming at all. And he walked out the door and left. And I stood there. I can remember standing there, like, naive young man, and thinking, it was a compliment.
Yeah.
After
that little moment, I guess, probably changed your perspective on it. Little bit of humanity just right there.
But the interesting thing is, I also learned about leadership, and it's not a great thing, but Ofsted gives you a lever. That external process gives you some levers, because I've been battling a very entrenched staff, and I went back in the staff room and said, "We got a year, otherwise you all lose your jobs. So you either come with me or you leave."
Yeah.
And I had the chair of governors by the side of me going, yes, so that was all right. So I had the back in the governing body, but it was and to be fair, the vast majority owned up to the fact they didn't know what they needed to do to improve. They'd been so underdeveloped, and they just carried on doing what they always did.
Yeah, needed that little boost. I mean, we could probably talk about Ofsted a little bit later. I feel like things are slightly different now, but there's certainly a place for accountability, and that judgment needs to happen in some way, doesn't it? So I really want to get on to the Federation. Tell me about where we worked together was in an organisation that has grown and grown, but when I first joined your organisation, it was one school just teetering on the edge of becoming more. So tell me about that little part in your, huge part of your career, but when it started.
Well, I've got to put it down to I had a very interesting and brilliant chair of governors who had just come in. He was a parent, and he ran a sort of a group of 40 banks, so he was an area manager of banks, and was very very challenging, but in a really good way. He push really hard. And he just came in, 2000 and end of 2003. He said, so I've been a governor, and I've got into knowing about schools. He said, this does not work. He says, I'm telling you, not from the education, I'm telling you from a business side. How schools are run doesn't make sense to me. And he said, because everybody's doing the same thing and reinventing the wheel. It's so poor in its efficiency, and you get demands for doing things which why can't somebody else do that? And he was just pushing the question. He said there's another way of doing it, and I'd actually read a number of articles about the 2003 Act that allowed for federations collaborations. I think there was federations collaborations and another one but federations could go in, which actually meant that schools could come together under one overarching governing body. And I talked to him about that. So he got very interested. He read up about it. He said, well, shall we do it? We got the school into a really strong position. And so therefore we had things to offer. And he said, well, why is there not enough sharing? It goes on. I said, because we're all driven to a silo mentality. Everybody's in competition with everybody else. And you will share musical instruments, but you won't share how you get your best maths results or any of those things, because it's counterintuitive, because actually they'll get better results than you. Children go in different directions. There's no there's no structure for proper collaboration. Anyway, so he drove that forward. He got the governing body of the school to vote to federate with another school, but we didn't have a school to federate with. He got them to vote on the principle. He was a genius and a very persuasive man. But he, in that sense, he got a governing body of, very local focused inward thinking to start with, to vote for. And then we went to the local authority and said, right, we want to try this federation thing. You come up with a school, doesn't matter where it is, we're up for it. So in the speed of the local authority, they came back 12 months later. And there's a school down the road, and which had gone through a lot of problems and had a temporary head teacher, but they couldn't recruit, etc., etc., etc. And so we did that. So we did the consultation, and we federated in 2006. And at that time, we were probably one of the first to do that at a primary level under the 2003 Act. And Bob, who was the chair, came to me and said, right, you've got to think now that you're going to be running more than 10 schools. So every decision you make has to be about, will this work with 10? So set your systems up for 10, even if you've only got 2. And it taught me a massive lesson about planning for growth.
Yeah. It's so different, I think, from how we, depending on when you started in education, see schools and how they work. And it brings in so much of that business thinking, doesn't it, into how we can set things up and how they work. And as I said to you before we started recording, I'm so fascinated because your experience is right at the start of the federations and what we have multi-academy trusts, which they are now very normal, but at that time it must have been really exciting to be right at the start of a journey that not many other people were doing.
It was brilliant, and it was exciting, and it was very interesting. I mean, very quickly I got invited to national things, because there wasn't many people doing it. I thought we would be like lots of others would be doing it across the country, and it wasn't. I think that I had underestimated the scare factor of doing this and how do you do it, and also the getting individual schools to join together. And they thought they would be losing so much of their independence and autonomy. And that's never changed. In all the 10 or 15 years after that never changed. So I got up there, and I can remember going to a meeting, and they were going to set up what can we do for guidance on how to federate, and all that sort of thing. And I then realized that in the room there were lots of people who were supporting other schools, looking after other schools, but none of them had done what we did. And I then realized we're unique in a lot of ways. And I came back, and there was a going through my head, and to exemplify that, I rang the DFE, or whatever it was called in those days, because it's changed its name loads of times, but call it DFE, and for a question about what I could do, what I couldn't do. And they said to me on the phone, we haven't got the answer for that, but we do know somebody who might be able to answer that. And they said, there's a head in Devon that you might like to ring. And they were signposting me back to me.
To yourself.
So I put the phone down, and I went to see the business manager, and I said, "Do you know what just happened? We can do what we like because no one knows the answer." So it was, we can make this up. We can actually do what we like. There was no regulations really, because they'd actually brought the act in, but thought no one's going to do it, and they never. So it was a beautiful time to just be creative.
Yeah.
You know?
And do you know what, when you were saying that, I really felt a sense that we don't have that now. Like,
no,
to have freedom, autonomy, to be able to make those some really quite big decisions, that just doesn't exist in leadership at the moment. And it feels so far away that actually it used to be like that.
I know, and it's not
crazy.
that long ago.
No.
You know, in the scheme of, you know, I started teaching in '76. You know, for Corona, it's a long time ago, and you know,
well, it's not even 20 years ago. We're talking, you know, we're talking about it being so different.
The thing is, you know, personally, looking at the system and looking at my time in it, I would say what the problem is that actually nobody in central government likes people to have that freedom. Because
yes, well, clearly, because it didn't last long, did it?
They feel they've lost control.
Mm.
They loved it for the period that it actually met what they wanted to do, which was to bring schools into larger groups. But they quickly then realized they had to put constraints and structures in. And my role, I've always believed in the beginning of it, was to be one step ahead of their structures. So we'd already put it in place before they put the structure in. A number of times said, people would say, "Well, how do you do it?" And we're not allowed to. I said, because we did it before they put the barrier in. So we were sort of like trying to race ahead of the structures. But now they've really regained control over the system, that everybody's now conforming, and it stifles creativity and innovation. That's the problem. Yeah. It's, you know, you don't want anarchy and chaos, but it is a good thing. Chaos is a good thing. I think leaders don't realize that actually living in chaos is really good, because it actually can be the most creative time of your life.
Yeah, it's when you have to dig. It was like you said, when you go into that headship and you think, "Oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing." That's when you have to dig deep and figure it all out, isn't it? But you're right. I think before we started recording, we talked about kind of some of the constraints that are there now, and maybe what the Federation Academy system could have been. Like, how do you feel about where we're at now, and what change? I guess how it could have been different.
Well, I went into the Federation when we started it, and then when we got inside, it was a golden opportunity, in my opinion, to change the way that the education system in this country had been run. It has not changed for 100 years. I mean, we used to have school managers, then we had governors. You know, you had a head in a school that was appointed by a governing body, and they ran the school. The local authority ran them, and everything, and it was very the same for decade after decade after decade. Even the 44 Act didn't change anything. This actually small act in 2003 actually opened a door to fundamental system change, and we could have created a brand new system. And what I think has happened is, because they didn't like the fact that this was actually something that could expand out of their control, I think what has happened is the constraints have done is we've reinvented the old system, but just call it a different name.
So life after levels, isn't it?
Same thing. Yeah, absolutely. That, you know, my take on education is that there's been, I can probably put a real good reason for a lot of the things that have happened in education. I can put a case for Ofsted. I can put a case for a national curriculum. I can put a case. All these things have in them, rooted in them, good reasons for doing it. They just mucked them up, right? They just couldn't let it be and make it really good. And so, for me, I see multi-academy trusts acting more like local authorities in their way of doing things. I always believed when I was a head that the job was undoable. You could not do it under the old system, where you had to be, you had to run the budget, the buildings, everything. That system was killing your heads. So the one thing that I really wanted was to put leaders of schools in schools and take everything I could off them, so they could be leaders of teaching and learning and drive forward children's learning, so the children got a great time and learned, and outcomes should go through the roof. Because any head in those days would tell you they spent 10% of their time on teaching and learning, 90% of the time on everything else. So if you flip that and say, right, I want the new leaders in the school to do 10% on everything else and 90% on teaching and learning, we ought to get a better system, and it would be best for children.
And I think we had that for a bit.
We did.
I think we did. That I was in that little bubble. I was lucky enough to lead a school in that organisation, and that's how it felt. There was other little bits that came along, because when you're a head, you do have to mop the floors and clean up the sick and all that. But a lot of our time was spent in that way. But now it feels like it's flipped again. In my most recent headship, and now it feels like you are trying to squish teaching and learning and driving forward improvements and being strategic at that level into about an hour of your day, and everything else is complete.
And you and I started education, many years apart, but we went into it for teaching and learning. We went in for what do children experience? What do they really get? Where are the memories that they have about their learning? The excitements of it all. Yeah, I forgot that. I mean, we did some great stuff, but when you have one of the teachers did a tennis ball cannon, right? So you actually shoot a tennis ball out of a big cardboard tube, and one of my great joy was, I was talking. Dad came to see me. He said, "Mr. Jones, I want to tell you, my son came home, and I've had the best time with him I can ever remember. He told me about this tennis ball cannon and how they made it in his class, and they went to the playing field and they shot these tennis balls all across the playing field. He said, we had such a laugh. We made it together last weekend, and we were shooting tennis balls over the house." He said, and I've never had so much personal, excitement time with him. And I thought, and inside you just great, because that's a memory for a father and a son. And when he's 30, he's going to remember that bit. That's why we got in it. And yet they want us to become leaders to have none of that. They want us to be running and jumping through hoops and ticking boxes and filling forms and doing everything. And what's the most disappointing is, and there are some really great trusts out there, don't get me wrong, I've worked with some brilliant people who are doing some great stuff, but there is too much of the people at the top bringing bureaucracy into a multi-academy trust where they don't need to. We've lost the trust in our profession with the people who do it best, which is the people in the classroom. And we've got to trust them and not make them have to do, fill these forms in, tick these boxes, do everything.
Yeah, we need to shift the perspective a bit, don't we? So the trust grew, the federation grew. What are your, I don't know, I mean, you must be incredibly proud of it as an organisation and as a block in your career, because it was huge, not only because it was very early on in the career and people were asking you how to do it all, but what are your, I don't know, fond memories or proud moments when you look back and think about it?
There are loads. I mean, to be honest, I'm a very lucky human being because I did 43 years working, and I never didn't want to go to work. I really, really loved my job. From the time I was on the gypsy site in a caravan to computing or whatever, and I loved every bit of my leadership as well. I found so much joy because the focus is when you see the change in children and people. First the children, second the people. Leadership brings you both. When you're just a class teacher, it's all about that the child experiences and development and excitement and interest and just galvanizing that beautiful childhood energy. When you're a leader, you got to hold on to that and got to dip into that and stay close to that. But you also get it when you see wonderful, talented, young and not so young people who get better and better at their job, but actually are enjoying their job and are you see them really ignite a passion and come and want to tell you, have you seen what someone's done? And I think leaders in a number of our multi-academy trusts and everything don't have enough time for that. They don't make time. They're too busy. They're too busy doing this or doing that and the structural things. And if you can get back to where the class is and where the children are, then your job becomes so much easier because you go back to that meeting and that battle with local, with buildings or so and so, energized because you're making a difference for the children. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's where the joy lies, isn't it? And that's what people say when they're able to be with the children and see the impact of the work they're doing. That's when it's so special.
And that goes back to why we invented heads of teaching and learning, right? The name was actually deliberately put together that they were the lead. I wanted leaders, but I got told you got to keep the head, and that was only for contracts, right? That was somebody in the legal department saying, well, no, you've got but you're the leader of teaching and learning, and that is the main thing that you should do if you're in a school. If you're running a school day to day, you're the leader of teaching and learning. The flip side of that is you've got to be damn good at teaching and learning to lead it.
Yeah.
So it makes it getting the people who actually understand teaching and learning in that leadership role.
Yeah, getting people into those, and it's right now it's getting people to want to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, because there's no joy in it. If there's no joy in it, people don't want to do it.
Yeah, joy is a really interesting concept. I've got a little project lined up that I want to do about joy. So I was just thinking about some of the I don't know, kind of the schools and the things that you do now. So now you're in consultancy, so you have that lovely job of going in and seeing schools, not having to be there every day. What things are you seeing at the moment that I guess link in with those challenges that you were starting to see when you stepped out of First Fed, some of the challenges around accountability, I guess, and the things that are really difficult at the moment?
I think the system is riddled with accountability, and actually that's wrong. It's responsibility that should be the driver. Everybody feeling responsible, and we're responsible first and foremost to the children, and then the parents, and they are the people who actually are the most important. But I'm responsible, not accountable to them, because accountability for me means it's you have to do this and you have to do that, and we have to measure it. Responsibility is, I think, comes from inside you. You actually are driven because you will do your best for the children because you feel responsible for them and their futures. not I'm accountable, therefore I have to get them through this pass mark. I have to get them to this bit. I've got to improve my attendance, right? Because otherwise it goes against me in Ofsted. Well, no, you improve your attendance because you're responsible for those children's lives, and if they're not coming into school, what's the reasons? How can you help? I remember, I went into Westcliff and talked to Lewis about him trying to get a child into school, and he was, that it was bribery. It was, if you
bribery works. Bribery works.
Yeah, but it was, it was changing the parents and the child's mindset about the fact that actually coming to school is good because I can get something from it, and there's more into it. But it was, he was doing it not because of his list or his target. He was doing it because that child was never going to get the skills and the knowledge that they needed to go to secondary school if they didn't come to school, and therefore they would more than likely be a year 7, year 8 dropout.
Yeah.
Whereas actually the life chances were being changed by creative thinking. That's what I mean by responsibility against accountability. And I think the trouble is, the more that I go into schools now, and they are all so worried about the accountability to internal masters and external masters, and and I worry that the people sometimes who are in the higher echelons of leadership, who lose touch with what schools are about, is that they spend their time passporting the external accountability structures into their schools and into the people, and that's why those people don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, that is a really interesting insight, that idea of responsibility versus accountability, because, and I think when you see great leaders who are passionate and do a really fantastic job, you're right, that's what they've got. They've got that deep understanding and purpose around the job that they are doing and the responsibility that they have. And actually they fight off, I think, quite a lot of the accountability and make some of those, we've talked about, needing to make brave decisions to say, I'm not going to do that, or that doesn't fit my cohort, or that doesn't work for our children. Because they rub together, don't they? And it's a shame that they do. I've talked to lots of people about the Ofsted framework itself and the curriculum, but how inspections just seem to feel really different to how they used to. I mean, we've been through a couple of inspections together, and I'm a bit sometimes nervous about speaking about inspection now and pride about it, because it comes now with such pressure. Whereas I remember, being in inspections, and at the time being just incredibly proud. It felt like such a purposeful, valuable, wonderful thing to do, because we were actually working on the things that were right. Whereas now I just think there's a shift against, going through that process and maybe getting an outcome that is seen externally as good, positive, but maybe you've had to make decisions that actually don't fit with what you want. And it used to be so much more aligned. If that makes sense.
I agree, and I totally agree. I think that I think Ofsted are in a very. I think Ofsted should be stopped. Should finish, and I think there should be some of the great thinkers in education come up with a structure that will be fit for purpose. Because I don't think that you should not have external accountability, or not accountability, but people come in to give you that external view that actually is check and balance. Because you can't be a leader of a school or a leader of a trust and just go, yeah, well, I know I'm doing it right, so it's okay. You've got to have somebody come in to validate stuff, and and peer-to-peer does work, but that's sometimes a sop to each other's peer, right? You want somebody who's going to come in and go, and if peer-to-peer works properly, then you don't fall out with somebody who tells you something you don't like. All right, well, I won't work with them anymore because they told me something I don't like. That's the problem. The trouble I think with Ofsted is that they tried really hard to keep changing stuff, they got two masters. They got the people pushing from our side, and there's people from ministers' side. And the ministers who, in my opinion, right, all went to public school. So what do they know about education? So for me, they've watered down the inspection framework and everything to try to be correct, and in doing so have missed all the things that make great schools, and now have only things that you can go, yeah, doing that, they're good. They're not doing that, they're not good. And it's gone to a simplified model that is not fit for purpose. Like we were talking beforehand, I said to you, the inspection, and I did 21 inspections or HMI visits or monitoring visits as the accountable person. My name was on every Ofsted in every one of the schools. Right, I didn't passport that down because I felt if I'm at the top of it, then I need to take the responsibility for it. But that one at Lady Seawards, when you were there, was a validation of all the things that I wanted to. I really wanted to happen in schools, and done by yourself. Who, I don't know, had you been head of teaching and learning for what?
2.5 years, I think.
Yeah, the most.
Yeah.
Right.
And a baby.
And staff, which were all so young. And I think, as we said before, I think it was something like across the 4 teachers they had between them something like 13, 14 terms of experience, and they came out with outstanding, with an HMI who was really, really, I mean, do you remember when he took all the books away for overnight?
Right, I don't even know if they're allowed to do that now.
He's collecting them all up to take them away to analyze them overnight. And they think, oh my gosh, I've lost control of this now. But actually, when he was feeding back, it was just it's one of the major highlights of my career. That feedback, it was so lovely to hear, and you go, right, it can be you can do that. It can be done. It can be done.
But we often talk about, and Lewis, I'm very lucky to have him as the first guest on the podcast, and we talked about how we felt that we had that accountability then. We made decisions over lunch. By Friday, we'd sorted them out. The value of being in a small school is very different to what you can do in a big school. But like you said, that newness of being in that framework of quite a new organization, having, you and other leaders who were saying, do what you think is right, give it a try. It was a fail fast kind of environment to live in. It was give it a try, see what happens. There aren't rules. There are some rules, but they're little and they keep things consistent. It's not about, everyone doing the same thing. And we made some really exciting big decisions, which I know, the curriculum framework has changed now, but I still think a lot of the things that we were doing then would stand up to the test of the framework now if we had the time and energy to get those things and the finances to get them in place. And I think those are the biggest challenges, because I'm still really passionate about the sector, and I wish that I could be in a position where I had all the tools available to me to recreate that in some ways, because it was a really magical time, and things are just they're different at the moment, but hopefully things will change. There's some great organizations out there doing some really interesting work on big scale, Fed and other organizations thinking about how we can make a change and have a shift, because we missed it with the Federation Act, and we missed that opportunity, but we need to make another opportunity because things need to change.
Actually, and what you said is absolutely spot on. You had the time and the energy, and the structure of these mats and the structure of the system should be in a way that actually gives leaders in the schools at all levels in the schools the time and the energy to do what they want to do. that's when they create new knowledge. That's when they create new thinking. That's when they create great ideas. Is when you have time and energy. If you're sucking time and energy out of the system by overburdening it and making it bureaucratic, you only become a managerial system, not a leadership system. And there's too many times people talk about leadership, and what they're really talking about is managerialism, and it's all management tasks. Actually, leadership, you know, I told you about Bob the chair, right? He said two things. He said one was, don't decide today what you're not willing to change tomorrow. Right? That doesn't mean flip flopping, but it doesn't mean don't get stuck in a train, a way of thinking. If you think of a better way, and he also said that actually you as a leader have to take your brain, your mind, to its very edge, put a deck chair down and sit in it. All right. And what he was saying is, if you don't give yourself time and space to think, then you can't change what's going on because you're on the hamster wheel. And I think there's too many schools now, which I go into, where I see too many people who are on the hamster wheel and they don't know how to get off. The only way they know how to get off is to leave the profession, and that's a waste of talent and a waste of resource.
Yeah. Isn't it? Well, he sounds like a very wise man, as are you, Mr. Jones. It's been so lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much for sharing shared experiences and insights. I've learned so much. It's been really fantastic.
It's been brilliant. I love it, as you can tell.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.